Please welcome to the stage co-host of Collision and Managing Director of Techstars Toronto, Sunil Sharma.
Good morning, Lisbon. Now, given the revelations from Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen, we all know about the damage that social media has done to society and that the time for self-regulation is over. In this session, a former advisor turned critic of Mark Zuckerberg will explain how Facebook is broken and how governments need to fix it. In conversation with Laurie Siegel, please welcome Elevation Partners' Roger McNamee.
Morning. It's good to be here with you.
Delight.
So, opening night, I interviewed Frances Haugen. So, I want to start by asking you about Frances. You've been an outspoken critic of Facebook for years. The voices are louder now. How is Frances Haugen different than people who've come forward against Facebook in the past?
So Frances Haugen is a transformational figure in my life. She is one of the most courageous human beings I've ever encountered. She's obviously authoritative. Her expertise is in the design of algorithms. She was amazingly persuasive. But here's the thing, I'm a tech person. She innovated in a way that blew my mind. She was the first person ever to perceive that you could do whistleblowing like a tech product announcement, a tech product rollout. And I would argue that the way she did her whistleblowing was the most effective product rollout since the original iPhone. And that idea had never occurred to me, and I just tipped my hat to her. Simply brilliant.
But in what sense? I mean, I understand this from a journalism standpoint because I was part of the consortium of journalists who got these papers. It was incredibly effective. You talk about it being like a product rollout. In what sense?
Well, in the sense that if you think about the movie Jaws, they don't show you the shark at the beginning of the movie. There's a nice build-up, and the anticipation makes the appearance of the shark more effective. And the use of the Wall Street Journal to do that build-up, followed by your thing with 60 Minutes, and then the Senate testimony, the impact of that was just, it literally stopped the conversation, restarted in a profound way.
So this is the question. I've covered Facebook almost my whole career, and no matter what the scandal, it doesn't seem to impact the business bottom line.
Yeah.
So will this impact Facebook's business?
Well, I think the most important thing to think about is that if it doesn't, then democracy and our ability to make our own choices may never recover. The issue with Facebook, the way I see it, is they're not the only tech company causing problems. In fact, the tech industry is not the only industry causing problems today. In the United States, we lost sight of something really important, which is that democracy and self-determination require the participation of everybody, and business requires government to act as a referee to protect the people. And Facebook constructed a network with 3 billion people with absolutely no walls, no safety net. They then constructed a business model that began with surveillance, where they know everything about all of us, because what they can't collect on their application, they collect by acquiring in the real world. They use that to understand all the patterns of human life. They then create a model for each one of us so they can see which patterns apply to us so they can forecast our behavior. And then they use recommendation engines to manipulate our behavior. That would be bad enough. But the incentives of the business drive and support and amplify the most intensely emotional content. The result of which is all these ideas that are normally at the fringes of society are driven into the mainstream. White supremacy, anti-vax, you name it. They've essentially created an environment without rules in which scams and extreme ideas have an evolutionary advantage. And we've allowed this to happen. If you look at the US response to COVID, if you look at the insurrection at the Capitol, those are examples of what the future will look like if we do not, in fact, regulate this.
What does regulation look like? I know Zuckerberg has even said, well, we've called for regulation too. So you've talked about 3 areas of the tech sector that need regulation: safety, privacy, and competition. What does this look like?
So here's my view. I'm actually very sympathetic with when Mark Zuckerberg says, hey, wait a minute. I'm not the only one doing this. In fact, he's absolutely right when he says that optimizing for shareholder value is his mission. That's the mission of every CEO in America, every CEO around the world. The problem is, in a world without rules, Facebook's been allowed to cause issues of safety, issues of privacy, and issues of competition. I want to address safety by recognizing the tech industry today is where food production was in 1900, where the pharmaceutical industry was in 1900, where the chemicals industry was in 1960. Core to the economy, but in desperate need of regulations that protect the people affected by the product. For safety, I'd like to see something that looks like the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. Something that sits there and says, this is the set of rules that every technology needs to comply with. Because there are things like facial recognition or deep fakes that today have no safe commercial application. And there are industries like crypto, where there obviously are safe applications, but where the way the business operates today is unsafe. Facebook, YouTube, TikTok are all unsafe today. And we need something to set the rules, because engineers are smart. They are great at managing constraints. You tell them what the rules are, they will make an optimal product around it. The second thing we need is privacy. I share the view of Professor Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard that surveillance capitalism, which is the business model of collecting all this data, of essentially extracting the essence of our humanity in data form and then using it to manipulate our behavior, that is as unethical as child labor. And it should be banned the same way that child labor was banned. There should be no secondary or third-party usage of location, health information, web browsing, app usage, any of those things. And lastly, we need to update the competition laws. Antitrust laws were created for an industrial economy. We're now in a data economy. And so we need to recognize that and change those laws. But that will not be enough. It will take years for the US to legislate that. Countries around the world need to take responsibility in their own markets for the things that matter most to them. And we must make sure that these companies obey the law. Facebook appears, according to Frances Haugen's stuff, to have violated at least 3 laws that have felony penalties. By my count, the total number is 6. And if we have a rule of law in the United States, we need to enforce it.
Do you believe Facebook should be broken up?
I believe that breaking companies up is the last step in the process. Right now, if you don't do something about safety and you don't do something about privacy, breaking up Facebook will just create more dangerous companies with greater incentives and at smaller scale, a greater opportunity to grow.
What do we get wrong about Facebook? In the time that, you were one of the the first really outspoken critics. Now it
Yeah.
seems like a lot of folks are jumping on the bandwagon to criticize Facebook. But what
It's-
do we get wrong about this?
So here's the thing. I worked really closely with Sheryl Sandberg for more than a decade. I worked really closely with Mark Zuckerberg for 3 years.
So what should we know?
I
Explain,
really-
tell us something we do not know
Yeah.
at this point.
So here's the thing. The thing we're missing from a policy perspective is that Facebook and Google, and perhaps many of you, have a value system that comes out of engineering, where engineers value efficiency. And they marry this to the goals of speed and scale. And the success of Google, the success of Facebook, TikTok, and all the others is based on the marriage of this focus on efficiency to speed and scale. And it has produced unprecedented wealth. Here's what the problem is, and this is what we got wrong. The United States, Portugal, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, Australia, we are all democracies. Our countries all have as our foundational principles both democracy and the right to self-determination, the right to make your own choices. Here's the problem. Democracy and self-determination are inefficient by design. They require deliberation. They require each and every one of us to engage and participate. Efficiency doesn't have to worry about any of that. It just goes straight to the target. So when a business gets to nation scale, as Google and Facebook have, and it's optimized for efficiency, it has an evolutionary advantage. And there is a conflict between efficiency and democracy that can't be settled through negotiation. One of them has to win. And all I ask is that we have an honest, open debate about this issue. Which system would we prefer? I am confident that there are many people who would be perfectly happy in a world like the metaverse, where the choices are made for them. But if we do not have an honest debate about this now, we're going to wind up in that place whether we want it or not. And I think that would be a terrible outcome.
Well, now that you've mentioned the metaverse, Facebook just rebranding as Meta. It's a pretty big deal for the company, company rebrand. Do you think that this will help or hurt Facebook?
Well, Lori, I think the important thing is the context. In the absence of Frances Haugen, I don't think there is a chance that Facebook would have done this rebranding or this emphasis on the metaverse now. Any of you who watched that demo, I mean, it's embarrassing. There is literally nothing in it that hasn't been available in the market from other people for a long time. And they didn't even clear the trademark rules on the name Meta. So they have a lot of litigation coming around that. This was something I think they were forced into by Frances Haugen. They weren't ready. It really shows. It was an attempt to change the subject. It did not work. I mean, yes, it got a lot of press, but I think as much of that press was focused on what Frances Haugen had said as it was on this idea of a new company. I think from Facebook's perspective, the goal in creating a new corporation called Meta is to find a way to insulate Mark Zuckerberg from responsibility and accountability for the things that have happened at Facebook over the last 17 years. It worked at Google. It may work for Facebook.
Okay.
And that, I think, is the goal. I think from Facebook's point of view, though, they are still on the defensive. And again, to be fair to Mark, I think the issue is with his vision. I think his actual behavior is not so different from other companies. And if you were to take out of the Fortune 500 the 5 big tech companies and just look at the other 495 CEOs of the Fortune 500, I would be willing to bet that every one of those people is jealous of the success of Mark Zuckerberg. And that every one of them, if you put them in Mark Zuckerberg's seat and didn't change anything else, they would behave precisely the way Mark has behaved. Because if you're a CEO of a public company, your job is to optimize shareholder value. And that is something Mark has done very, very well. I would argue that the cost is too high. Your mileage may vary.
I think the metaverse move is interesting, and Mark's a product guy. He saw WhatsApp and Instagram coming, and so it's clearly interesting to see him anticipate the metaverse.
I believe that virtual reality is an incredible opportunity.
Right.
I want to have great games. I want to have fun. I do not want to have somebody controlling my life using this technology. And again, you may feel differently, and that's fine. But that's the conversation we should be having now.
You advised Mark early in his career. Just take us to some of those early conversations. Did you ever anticipate that this is the direction the company would take?
So I had a wonderful relationship with Mark, and it came to an end. I stopped being an advisor to him when he told me that his goal was to get to 1 billion users when the company had roughly 250 million. And I said to him, Mark, think about this. At 1 billion users, that's 1 in 7 people in the world. You're going to be forced to do business in authoritarian regimes or with business partners, scammers and the like, you shouldn't want to do business with. I can't do that. And we parted as friends, and if he were to call me up today, I would still treat him as a friend. I'd like to help him get this right.
Last question, because we got to wrap. Why is this so personal to you?
I just love democracy. I like making my own choices. And I was involved in this company, and I saw an opportunity for me to contribute to help everybody. And I'm still taking advantage of that the best I can. But I got to tell you, thank God for Frances Haugen. She is so much better at this than I am. I'm just really delighted she's here and that she's going to take over and take us to the promised land.
Awesome. Roger McNamee, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Guys.